Hello class, this is Professor Sitz. We are currently in our week focused on the decolonization of British colonies in Africa. This lecture will take a closer look at 1. Nigeria. Here's a Google Maps image to remind everyone where Nigeria is located in Western Africa. In our previous weeks, we've examined how World War II played a role in creating an environment in which colonies really pushed for independence. Now this included Nigeria. Initially, the British didn't expect their African colonies to play a significant role in the war effort. They did establish the Nigerian Supply Board to control production of trade, but didn't initiate changes until the war officially started. Britain would lean heavily on her African colonies for resources, though, especially after the fall of France and the loss of her Southeast Asian colonies. Now let's look at Nigeria in World War II, beginning with military contributions. Roughly 100,000 Nigerians served with the British colonial forces, mainly in the Royal West African Frontier Force, where they formed 2 regiments. The upper image shows West African troops in India. They also provided labor for military construction projects, and the image in the middle with the palm trees shows men building an airstrip. Nigeria also contributed funds. The image towards the top shows a Spitfire named Nigeria because it was paid for by Nigerians. And the bottom image is of an armored vehicle that was bought with donations from Nigeria. What experiences did Nigerians have because of military service? Most obviously, they traveled. Some fought Italians on the Kenyan border, others served in the Middle East, and some served in India and Burma. They generally earned higher pay in the service than they would have as civilians back in Nigeria. They witnessed British military losses, especially to the Japanese in Asia. As author Chima Correa wrote, quote, "The idea of the white man's invincibility and racial superiority was destroyed by the war." And at the end of the war, there was not a quick return home. Demobilization for African troops lasted until 1947. And on return home, they faced widespread unemployment. The colonial government did make some efforts to alleviate that problem with quotas on hiring veterans, which were sometimes ignored, and they also instituted training programs in trade and agriculture. Probably more important than military contributions was the production of agricultural products and mineral resources. Rice was one of the most important crops. Nigeria grew thousands of tons of it in some regions, and it fed people in Nigeria, neighboring colonies, as well as military stationed in the region. Another important crop was groundnuts or peanuts. There's a poster here thanking Nigeria for groundnuts to help feed fighting forces. They produced ghee, cassava, rubber, cotton, palm oil products, and produce such as onions and potatoes. In terms of mineral resources, tin was a major product. And here's another poster thanking Nigeria for tin to make engine parts for army lorries. Nigeria would also supply salt and coal. How did Britain achieve the wartime production in Nigeria? Sadly, they used forced labor, conscripting men to work in the tin mines. They also established restrictions on labor activities such as strikes. They increased taxes, including introducing new ones. There was also trade restrictions on exports and even on movement of goods between different regions in Nigeria. They established price controls and not just on imports. For example, government officials in Abeokuta tried to get commodities below the actual cost of production, which did not make farmers happy. Now, what experiences did Nigerians have on the home front because of these wartime policies? Well, there was rationing and food shortages, and some areas experienced famine. With men being sent to work in mines or to serve in the military, there was less available for agricultural work. Some cocoa farms failed, mostly because they lost their biggest customer, Germany. There was just general economic upheaval, and trade between regions was impacted. There was also petrol rationing, which impacted a wide range of Nigerians, especially delivery drivers. Now, one aspect to look at is petitions from the Nigerians during the war. Government policy was viewed as something to negotiate. Men, women, children, trade groups, market vendors, a whole range of Nigerians wrote petitions airing their grievances. For example, one woman described herself as a widow because her husband was off at war and she was asking for a permit to trade so she could support her family. And in some cases, people did get reprieve from regulations, and they did sometimes influence policy. Again, author Chima Correa observes, this reveals that Nigerians were not passive recipients of colonial regulations and control during the war. Now, many people's favorite topic, wartime propaganda. The British focused on producing propaganda emphasizing Nazi Germany's totalitarianism and racism versus the Allies' messages of liberty and democracy. Now, Nigeria would produce some of their own propaganda. Newspapers that had previously focused on anti-colonial messages would publish articles in support of the war. And the propaganda influenced the expectation of independence after the war. In fact, Nigerian nationalists would borrow heavily from wartime propaganda to create anti-colonial messages after the war. So World War II caused economic upheaval and increased political awareness, which would help propel Nigeria towards decolonization. In your assigned readings, you saw that author Reed included Nigeria's decolonization in the legal constitutional category. The transition from colony to independent country was a negotiated process versus a revolution, and it would take about a decade, and it actually involved 3 different constitutions. In his description of the process, Reed explained the slowness of it as due to disagreements among the 3 main political groups in Nigeria, the Yoruba Action Group, the Northern People's Congress, and the National Council for Nigeria and Cameroons. All 3 parties were more regionally versus nationally focused. Reed also mentioned 3 different possible outcomes: a federal system with 3 semi-autonomous regions, which is what they settled on, a strong central government, or 3 independent countries, the last not being supported by the British. Now, Reed's description was very brief, and I want you to think about how decolonization was a complicated process with multiple factors at work. Ask if this is the whole story. Who else had a stake in how decolonization played out? The British government, for one. They certainly wanted to see an independent country maintaining close ties with Britain. And in the Lawal essay, you read about another group, British business. So let's take a closer look at that group. British businesses were instrumental in the formation of the colony, and they would definitely try to influence the devolution of power. Lawal's essay quoted one source as saying British businesses did not play a role. However, Lawal found evidence to the contrary, including meeting minutes and government memos. Businesses submitted clauses they wanted included in the Constitution. They also asked to review the document and provide feedback. They encouraged political activity by their trusted African employees, offering to pay the difference in salary if they took public office. And they also convinced the British Colonial Office and the Nigerian politicians to include special representatives in the new government who would work to protect the company's interests. Nigeria achieved independence in 1960, and the Nigerian Federation was formed. 3 years later, the country became a republic, only to see a military coup topple the government in 1966. Civil war followed in 1967, and Nigeria was under military rule until 1979. When the Second Republic was formed, which only lasted until 1983. Periods of military rule followed until 1999. Today, Nigeria is again a republic and just celebrated their 60th anniversary. And finally, just a quick slide with the links to the images that were used in this presentation. Thank you and good night.